What's going on, Cowboys Nation? Welcome back to the channel, and today we've got some absolute heat coming out of the NFL coaching rumor mill because Brian Flores just said something that has completely set the league on fire, and yes, it directly involves the Dallas Cowboys. When these comments first started circulating, people brushed it off as typical coach speak. But once you really break down what Flores said, when he said it, and who he was talking about, it starts to feel a lot less accidental and a lot more like a message. And when a respected defensive mind like Brian Flores sends a message, the entire NFL listens, especially when the Cowboys are involved. Now, before anyone jumps into the comments saying this is clickbait or overblown, slow down for a second, because context matters here. Brian Flores is not some random assistant coach trying to get attention. This is a guy who has taken over broken defenses, turned them into top units, stood up to ownership, paid a serious professional price for it, and still continues to earn respect around the league. So when Flores speaks openly about certain jobs, certain organizations, and certain situations, it carries weight, whether people want to admit it or not. The Cowboys' coaching situation has been one of the most talked about storylines in the NFL over the last year. Even when the team is winning, there's always that underlying tension, that feeling of, are they really maximizing this roster? Are they really built for January football? And are they truly being led by the right voice? And that's why Flores' comments hit differently, because they weren't loud, they weren't emotional, but they were calculated. Flores was asked about ideal head coaching situations and what he values in an organization, and instead of giving the generic answer about alignment or culture or trust, he specifically highlighted accountability, structure, and support from ownership without interference in football decisions. That alone already made people raise eyebrows, because if you've followed the Cowboys at all over the last decade, you know that ownership involvement has always been part of the conversation, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. Then Flores went a step further. He talked about how some organizations have everything in place to win, but lack the willingness to make hard decisions. That line right there is what sent Cowboys fans, analysts, and insiders spiraling. Because if there is one criticism that has followed Dallas for years, it's that they hesitate when it comes to making uncomfortable changes, especially at the top. What makes this even more interesting is the timing. These comments didn't come during the offseason chaos. They didn't come right after a playoff loss. They came during a moment where the Cowboys are still viewed as contenders, still loaded with talent, and still expected to compete at a high level. Which means Flores wasn't reacting emotionally. He was speaking strategically. Now let's talk about why Brian Flores and the Cowboys even belong in the same conversation to begin with. Flores is a defensive-minded head coach who thrives on discipline, adaptability, and aggression. He believes in putting players in positions to succeed and holding everyone accountable, stars included. That philosophy would immediately change the tone in Dallas, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Yes, the Cowboys' defense has been flashy. Yes, they've created turnovers. But when the lights get brightest, the unit has had moments where it looks undisciplined, predictable, or overwhelmed. Flores' entire career has been about fixing exactly that type of issue. He doesn't care about reputation. He cares about execution. What shocked a lot of people was Flores openly acknowledging that certain high-profile jobs would be attractive if the conditions were right. He didn't name the Cowboys directly, but he didn't have to. When you talk about legacy franchises, massive resources, a passionate fan base, and championship expectations, everyone knows who's on that short list. And here's where things get really interesting. Multiple insiders around the league have quietly mentioned that Flores has always admired organizations that embrace modern football thinking while still respecting tradition. That's Dallas in theory, but not always in practice. Which leads to the big question. Was Flores challenging the Cowboys to prove they're ready for a coach like him, or was he subtly saying that the door is open if the situation changes? Cowboys fans know this all too well. Every coaching rumor feels like déjà vu. Every offseason brings whispers. But this feels different because Flores isn't campaigning. He isn't leaking through agents. He isn't doing media rounds. He answered a question honestly, and the honesty is what rattled people. Let's not ignore Flores' past either. His experience in Miami ended in controversy. His lawsuit against the league changed how coaching hires are discussed publicly. Some owners see him as difficult. Others see him as principled. But one thing is undeniable. Players respect him. Defensive players especially swear by him. Imagine what a Flores-led Cowboys defense could look like with Micah Parsons being used as a true chess piece rather than just a weapon. Imagine a scheme that evolves week to week instead of relying on raw talent to bail it out. That's the vision people started picturing the moment these comments surfaced. But the shock wasn't just that Flores might be interested in a job like Dallas. The shock was that he implied not every franchise is ready for the type of leadership required to win championships. That's a subtle but powerful statement, especially when coming from someone who's been inside NFL buildings and seen how things really work behind closed doors. For Cowboys fans, this hits a nerve because deep down, many feel the same way. The roster is talented. The facilities are elite. The brand is global. Yet the results in January remain the same. So when a coach like Flores talks about alignment and difficult decisions, it feels personal. Now let's talk about the locker room dynamic. Flores is not a player's coach in the traditional sense. He's not going to joke around or play politics. He demands respect through preparation and results. That would be a culture shock in Dallas, where personalities, contracts, and star power often dominate the conversation. Some players would thrive under that structure. Others might push back. And that's exactly why ownership support becomes critical. Flores made it clear without saying it outright that a coach needs full backing to enforce standards. That's the real subtext of his comments, and that's why people are connecting the dots to Dallas. The national media reaction was immediate. Some praised Flores for being honest. Others accused him of being passive-aggressive. But nobody ignored it. And when the Cowboys are involved, nothing stays quiet for long. Insiders have already started speculating. Could Dallas ever truly hand over full control to a head coach like Flores? Would Jerry Jones be willing to take a step back for the sake of winning? Those questions have been asked for years, but Flores just put them back in the spotlight. What makes this situation even more fascinating is that Flores doesn't need the Cowboys. He's highly respected as a coordinator and will continue to get opportunities. That gives him leverage. He can afford to wait for the right job rather than jumping at the first opening. That alone makes his comments feel intentional. And here's something most people aren't talking about. Flores has seen what happens when organizations prioritize optics over substance. His comments sounded like someone who is done compromising his values for a paycheck. If a job doesn't align with his vision, he's not interested. That's a powerful stance in a league where coaches are often disposable. So where does this leave the Cowboys right now? Officially, nowhere. There's no announcement, no change, no formal interest. But unofficially, the conversation has shifted. Fans are asking harder questions. Analysts are revisiting old criticisms. And the idea of Flores in Dallas is no longer unthinkable. If anything, these comments serve as a mirror. They force organizations like the Cowboys to reflect on whether they're truly built to win championships or just built to stay relevant. Flores didn't accuse anyone. He didn't name names. He simply described what it takes to succeed, and people drew their own conclusions. Now imagine this scenario. The Cowboys have another strong regular season but fall short in the playoffs again. The pressure intensifies. The fan base grows restless. At that point, a coach like Brian Flores suddenly becomes very attractive. Not because he's flashy, but because he represents change. And change is scary, especially for a franchise rooted in tradition. But sometimes tradition becomes an excuse. Flores's comments cut through that noise. They challenge teams to evolve or be left behind. Whether or not Flores ever coaches the Cowboys, his words have already had an impact. They've reopened debates. They've forced uncomfortable conversations. And they've reminded everyone that talent alone isn't enough. For Cowboys fans watching this, the takeaway is simple. Pay attention to what's being said between the lines. The NFL is a league where nothing is accidental. When a respected coach speaks candidly, it's worth listening. Brian Flores didn't shock the NFL by yelling. He shocked the NFL by telling the truth calmly. And sometimes, that's the loudest statement of all. So the big question now is not whether Brian Flores wants the Cowboys' job. The real question is whether the Cowboys are ready for someone like Brian Flores. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Would Brian Flores be the right coach for Dallas, or would the culture clash be too much? Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you in the next one.